Hi, and welcome to this Android video development course. Today we're going to talk about downloading and installing the ADT, or Android Development Tools. Now, prior to version 21, you had to download separately Eclipse and Android, or whatever development environment you were going to use, and then the Android SDK, and then kind of put them together. And that had positive and negative aspects, but now Android has bundled Eclipse with its development toolkit. So here's how we download that and get started. What we do is we go to developer.android.com, and we can just type that in. It will take us to index.html. Then we click on this small down arrow by developers, or we can just click on developers, and that's going to open up we click on the little down arrow there. That's going to open up under Design, Develop, and Distribute. And what we want is Tools, and then just click on Get the SDK, as we can see here. So now for whatever operating system you're running, and I'm running Mac OS X, for whatever operating system you're running, it will detect the operating system and then give you the right bundle. So all you really need to get started is this SDK bundle. So it's called the ADT bundle for the operating system you're talking about. And you can click on this button to start the download. Then you need to accept the terms and conditions. And you can read these. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and then click the box. I've read them before. And then download the SDK bundle for Mac. And then it says get ready to code. So the download really is that simple. And if we click on the download bar here, we can see that this is a fairly large download. So I'm going to pause, and then when we come back, I'll show you about running the SDK for the first time, or the ADT bundle for the first time, how to get that downloaded file into the right place, and then how to run the file and start setting up your Android development environment to the proper settings so that you can do what you need to do. Okay, so now our download is complete, and we can just show that in Finder. And we can see that in the downloads directory we have an ADT bundle with a date, and then we have two folders. We have Eclipse and the SDK folder. We can just take this file, or this folder, and copy it, and then we'll paste it wherever we want it. Now I have a developer directory, and I would suggest you do the same. And we'll just paste this that bundle into the developer directory, and it'll copy. And as soon as it's done copying, we can just open it up and run Eclipse from there, and it will just run. Now there's some setup steps that we need to conclude before we actually start to develop for Android. And they involve downloading the versions of the SDK and setting up emulator profiles and so forth. So we'll do that next. Now, if we open this up and open up the Eclipse folder, we'll see Eclipse with its ADT icon, and we'll double click that, and we can see that it runs. We get the prompt about downloading or running an application downloaded from the internet. And we see that we're running Android Developer Tools. Now, to do the initial setup, I would suggest that we just take the default workspace. But when this runs for the first time, it takes a little bit longer than the subsequent runs. So we can just run this in the Documents workspace, and we'll do that, because all we're going to do is do the final setup steps. Each project that you start should run in its own workspace. So when you start a project, what I like to do is I create a folder for that project and then browse to that project. This you will see the first time about contributing usage statistics. I always go ahead and do this. It's your choice. And then we can close the welcome screen. We'll do that. This contains a lot of interesting information that you can read. And here is the Eclipse workspace. So now, the next step to do is the Android Sdk Manager. The Android Sdk Manager is going to allow you to update and install versions of the SDK. So right now, it comes with API 17 already installed. The SDK platform is installed. Now the documentation, and the ARM system image is installed. The rest of pieces, the documentation, the samples, these are not installed. We can install them if we want to. The SDK tools and the platform tools are installed, and we can see the version numbers of these here. If we want to install for another SDK or an API level, for example, Android 2.3.3 is also very popular out in the wild right now, then we can install this. And if we were going to do that, we would just click on the appropriate checkbox, or if we wanted to install all pieces of that API, the samples and the Google APIs and so forth, then we can install that. And then you would click here on Install for Packages, and that would install the 2.3.3 API. I'm not going to do that right now. I want to, because that will take time. But there's also a few extras that are installed. There's an Android support library that's installed, and the rest of these aren't, but you can pick these up if you need them. So then the next step, and really the last step for an install using this new ADT bundle, is to go to Window and then Virtual Device Manager. Because in order to run on the emulator, you need to have a virtual device installed. Right now there's no AVD available. So we'll click New, and we can just call this level 17 or whatever we want to call it, just so that we know what it refers to. And we'll say the device is, I don't know, let's just make it a generic 4-inch WBGA. We can make sure the hardware keyboard is enabled. We can disable that. We can display a skin with hardware controls, or we can disable the hardware controls. We can emulate a front camera. Well, we can emulate a back camera on this 4-inch WBGA. We can specify the amount of RAM, the virtual memory heap here. We can say that there is the default of 200 megs of internal storage, or we can set that to anything we want. We can make an SD card if we like, and so forth. So these are the emulation options. We'll just accept those defaults and click OK. And now we have a new AVD level 17. The next step is to go ahead and write a simple application to make sure that everything is working. So we'll go with a new Android application project. Click that. And let's just call this test. And we need to set the package name to something unique. And we'll go with API 17 right straight down across the board. Click Next. We'll have a blank activity. And we can go with the defaults here. Normally I do. Main activity is going to be the activity name of the workspace activity, and then the layout name, and so forth. So now when this finishes, it will open up the image of the screen here, the layout, And it's still loading, and as soon as it finishes, it will refresh automatically. So this is good. We can see that we have just a basic Hello World application. And now if we run it, it'll bring up the emulator and run the application. So now the first time we run one particular application, it may not do anything, but remember that we need to be in a runnable piece of code. This layout, XML, is not runnable, so we need to be in a runnable piece of code. Now the first time we run, or attempt to run, it's going to ask us for a way to run test, or a way to run this project. We want to always run this as an Android application. We'll click OK. And now in the console, we will start to see some messages about loading a new emulator with a virtual device in level 17. This is the emulator that we just created in the manager. And now the end come up and load. It says it's waiting for android.process.acore to load. This is your home process. So again, I'm going to pause while this loads, and then when it runs, we'll come back and finish up. Okay, we're back. So now the emulator does the to see all your favorite apps thing, and we can touch that. And actually it said it failed to install the test APK on the device. That's okay. If this happens, the best way to deal with this is to completely stop the emulator and to restart the application and allow it to use a new emulator. If your emulator gets out of sync like that, it will. So just go ahead and install, or just go ahead and stop the emulator, the old one, and allow ADT to start a new emulator to run your application in. So now it looks like it's going to work. We can drag the lock out. We can see that it has uploaded and installed test APK, and that's our project name with the APK after it. And it should try to run it here in a moment. But I did want to mention that if the project doesn't run in the emulator the first time, don't worry about it. It often doesn't. Just go ahead and quit that version of the emulator or that copy of the emulator, rerun the project, and let it bring up a new copy of the emulator. Because what will happen if you don't quit is about 60% of the time, let's say, and there it's starting the activity and the intent, about 60% of the time, let's say, it will fail the first time. After you have a good emulator run with this version of the ADT, leave the emulator up and running, because then you can make changes to your program. They will upload to the emulator, and this process will happen much more quickly. Once the emulator runs once, it seems to be very stable in this new version of the ADT. Sometimes you have to completely get out of the ADT. In other words, quit out of Eclipse, restart everything, and then come back in to get the emulator to run. Don't worry about it. It's not your fault. It's a problem and kind of a known issue with Google. So this dialog is asking us if we want to auto-monitor logcat. If you are writing out log statements, it's a good idea to monitor logcat. Sometimes, if you're not writing out log statements, it can be kind of information overload. But you can always go ahead and monitor logcat. Right now, we see that we have an emulator without GPU emulation, and that's fine for what we're doing. So here's our emulator, and it is running our test, and here's our text, hello world, and of course we can quit. And then also that application is going to be loaded up in our applications area, and there it is, it's test. And we can rerun the app. Sorry about that. We can rerun the app, and there it is. Okay, so this has been a description of how to download and install the ADT, and also to go in and download the pieces of the SDK that you need for your particular platform or those that you will be developing for, how to set up a virtual device. And another thing I did want to mention about the SDK Manager is that it will let you know when a new version of the platform tools is ready for installation. Now, if Google fixes this, it will be really neat because we will be able to install the new version here. It'll say new version available, and it does do that now. But in my experience, when I went from 21.0 to 21.1 and did the installation process here, it broke it. What I had to do is completely delete the ADT folder that I showed you about downloading, completely delete that, and then get a new one. And then look for my images that I needed, set up my new virtual devices and so forth. When they fix this, it'll be really nice because then we'll be able to go to 21.2, let's say, with a much cleaner update rather than a new installation. Okay, thank you very much.